January, traditionally we discuss hazardous materials, so that's what we're going to spend the next 45 minutes to an hour talking about. We're going to focus on your particular area of training. You know, we have several tiers of training. We have Tier 1, Tier 2, we have a Tier 2 LQ, and Tier 3. Some of you have been through this training once or twice, some of you have been through it 13 or 14 times. So it builds. They build on one another. So if you're a Tier 2 employee, you still have Tier 1 training, but you're called a Tier 2 employee. Whatever your highest level of training is what you are called. So if you had 1, 2, and 3, you're a Tier 3 employee. Doesn't negate the fact that you've had Tier 1 and Tier 2 training. So we're going to talk about the tiers, what they stand for, what they mean. We're going to go through them. We're going to talk about spill prevention. We're going to talk about spill response. We're going to talk about what's in our spill kits. And then we're going to have a quiz, and we'll be done. How many of you are confident what level of HazMat training or tier you are? Anybody besides Sean?
Can you read that one more time?
What level of HazMat training are you? Do you know? Y'all are Tier 2. Okay, you are Tier 2 employees. Okay, and we'll talk about why you're Tier 2 in just a minute. Tier 1, and you can make notes. I'll always remind you, if you make notes front and back, you've probably made way too many notes. So just jot down some of the highlights. There will be a test, an evaluation at the end of the class. It won't be too complicated. You need a pen? Go ahead with that. Everybody else got a pen? Anybody need one? Besides me. All right. Tier 1 training. Anybody remember who gets Tier 1 training? It is everybody. Everybody in the company. Everybody from the janitor to the CEO gets Tier 1 training. Tier 1 is general awareness. It is hazardous communications, which you have to be trained in hazardous communications every year. We will have that class in a couple months. We'll have that separate from this class. In the past, it has been lumped into this, and it ends up being an hour-and-a-half class, and we're just not going to do that. So we're going to have another class later on in the year where we will do your your HazCom training, hazardous communications. DOT security awareness is a part of Tier 1. Right to know, which is basically your right to know what hazards exist. That is a part of Tier 1. And all of that you went through at the time of training. And none of that is required except for hazardous communications on an ongoing annual basis. So we'll do that later on. So Tier 1 is just general basic, general awareness, okay? Tier 2, which is what virtually all of you are, is someone who comes into contact with hazardous materials. Now we'll talk about the different ways that you can come into contact in a minute, but if you come into contact any way, shape, or form with hazardous materials, that makes you a Tier 2 employee, and that is what each of you is. Tier 3, Tier 3 training is for those who come into contact with hazardous wastes. Okay? Hazardous wastes. Hazardous waste training has to be done annually as well. That training will take place with the employees that are affected tomorrow afternoon at 3:30. That will be one single special class for everyone who has waste employee. That's primarily the paint line, coder operators, the coders, anybody who works in the coding department, maintenance. Some supervisors will be coming here from other departments, and myself, and that's primarily it for hazardous waste. So there is one other tier of training. We've got Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. There's also what we call Tier 2 LQ. Okay, That Tier 2 LQ is a special addendum to Tier 2 training. We will not be doing that in this class. I'll tell you now, the last three, there's probably 4 questions on the evaluation that you will not be able to answer today because I only made one evaluation. And I'll tell you specifically which ones of those are when I hand out the evaluation. But they deal with limited quantity. It's what the LQ stands for. None of you in here should come into contact with touch-up paints on any kind of regularity or solvent-based caulks and sealants. But that is who gets the Tier 2 LQ training. This is primarily warehouse workers, drivers, sales personnel because they sell this stuff. So that is the Tier 2 LQ training, and again, this is the LQ marker right here. Okay, so you need to be familiar with this. This is a HazWaste marker. Okay, but we're not going to have to talk about that today. We're going to spend our time focusing just on Tier 2 without the LQ portion. All right. Bear with me 1 second. I apologize. All right. You don't get to 37 years of marriage by not at least letting your wife know that the reason you didn't answer the phone call is because you're doing something, knowing that if she calls back a second time, I'll take her call. All right, so whatever tier of hazardous material training you have to be authorized for that level. How, based on the past few months' conversations, how are you authorized? Through what? Training. Exactly. Very good. You're authorized through training. If you haven't been trained, you're not authorized. You can't be authorized. It's not my wife calling you, I'm sure. All right. Remind me before the next, tomorrow we're going live. Remind me. Silence your cell phone. We'll have live classes tomorrow, Thursday, and Friday for the branches. Yesterday and today's classes kind of dry runs, recording and testing out the live feed. So you have to be trained in order to be authorized, and if you're not authorized, you're not that tier of training. All right, so again, what is your tier?
Tier 2.
Tier 2. Let's talk about Tier 2. I said that Tier 2 is someone who what? Comes into contact with hazardous materials. What are some of the ways that you can come into contact? Using it, exactly. That's the way the majority of you come into contact with it, is you use it. How do you use it? Spray bottles. What is it you're coming into contact with?
Oil.
Oil. Vanishing oil. Vanishing oil is hazardous because it is flammable. Okay. These are the things you need to know. You come into contact, you use a hazardous material. How? You spray it. What are you spraying? Vanishing oil. Why is it hazardous? Because it's flammable. Some of you may use some MEK from time to time to clean parts and rollers. Okay, how do you use that? It's usually a little squeeze, squirt bottle, wipe it on with a rag, and it is hazardous because
It's flammable.
Exactly. All right, it does evaporate quickly. So using it is one way to come into contact. How else might someone come into contact with hazardous materials? Well, walking past it, not necessarily. Hopefully they don't come into contact walking past it. But it comes to our dock on a truck. What happens? Somebody has to receive the shipment. So the people in shipping and receiving have to be at least Tier 2 because they come into contact with it because they ship it or receive it. And then lastly, the most common other way to come into contact with it is handling it. And you say handling or transporting it. Handling or transporting. And when I say that, I don't necessarily want you to think of truck drivers. I want you to think about the fact that you've got a little 32-ounce squirt bottle that you're spraying vanishing oil on some material with. Well, where does that come from? It comes out of a 55-gallon barrel that's parked on the far end of your department. How does it get from that barrel to your container? Well, maybe somebody pumps some of it into a 5-gallon bucket and carries it and fills yours and fills this one and fills that one and fills this one. That person is transporting or handling it. So that's another way you can come into contact. And regarding that, remember, if you do transport or handle a hazardous material like that, what should it be at all times when you're transporting it? It should be labeled, and what else? Labeled and covered. Very good. Labeled and covered. We need to know what it is, and we need to make sure it's not going to slosh out or easily spill out of the container. Okay? So labeled and covered. Preferably, you're going to use the gas can type flammable container when you're transporting it. But if you use a 5-gallon pail, that's fine. Just make sure it's marked. Make sure there's a lid on it so that if you get interrupted and you have to set that down before you planned on it, somebody knows what's in that container and there's a lid on it. Okay? All right, so that is coming into contact. Now, we want to prevent spills from happening. We want to prevent any unintentional release of these chemicals. Okay, when you're using a spray bottle, it's a release, but it's intentional. We want to prevent unintentional. What are some ways that we can prevent an unintentional release of hazardous chemicals?
Seal it up.
Right, keep it sealed. Keep that lid on it like we talked about. What else? Just general stuff. Check the material. Check the container that you're carrying it in, right? Make sure there's no rust spots, any punctures, any holes. Use care and caution. Realize and be aware of the fact that what you're working with is indeed hazardous. Okay, so through knowledge. I asked you a minute ago, so what do you use? How do you use it? Why is it hazardous? Knowing those things is the awareness and the knowledge that you need to have that helps you. I mean, if you're carrying a bucket of water, you don't have to be that careful with it. I mean, you certainly don't want to unnecessarily spill it, but you have the knowledge, okay, this is not dangerous. Unless you work in a factory filled with chlorine, in which case water is very dangerous. The irony of that is swimming pools are full of chlorine. But we won't get into the chemistry of chlorine and water right now. But the fact is, knowing what you're handling and having a general awareness of the hazards that are associated with it will help you very much to prevent a spill from occurring. Using care and caution, taking your time, don't get in a hurry. And we all do it. We all get in a hurry and we get careless. Today at lunch, I got in a hurry and I got careless and I almost had a car back into me. And by law, they would have been at fault. But the reality is, when I had to slam on my horn because I was whipping through Wendy's really fast because I knew I had a 12:30 class here and it was 10 minutes till 12, and I was frustrated that I was going to have to get indigestion and eat my lunch really quick, I was not paying kind of attention I needed to pay and probably driving a little fast in the Wendy's parking lot. Car almost backed out into me. I slammed on my horn and I pulled in my parking spot and I just sat there a minute and I had to go, dude, you need to slow down. You need to think. You need to be more careful. I realized that I was getting in a hurry, I was getting frustrated, and I was letting it affect whether I was being careful or careless. And sometimes we just got to catch ourselves, take a deep breath, realize we need to slow down a little bit, we need to think about what we're doing, and we need to be more careful before somebody gets hurt. Okay? So just use some care and caution. All right, now, there is going to be times that no matter how much care and how much caution we know we're supposed to use, and no matter how aware we are of the hazards and how much knowledge we have of them, spills are going to occur. So we need to talk about what to do when a spill occurs. Now I want to go back to something a minute. Before I talk about that, I want to go back to something that I didn't touch on earlier. Oils. Where do your oils, typically you spray oils on your metal, correct?
Yes.
Where does it end up a lot of times?
The floor.
On the floor. And when it's on the floor, what do we got to do?
Get that stuff and dust over it. Or whatever.
Peat moss,
Peat
put
moss.
some stuff on it, throw some rags down, clean it up. Now, oil is hazardous, right? So when you take a rag and you clean up some oil off the floor, what does the rag become?
Hazardous.
Hazardous. If you throw a bunch of peat moss down and it absorbs that oil, what does the peat moss become?
Hazardous.
That's right. So all of a sudden you've increased the amount of hazardous material that you have when you clean up a spill. Okay, so now the question could be asked, what is that? Well, let me ask you first before I say that. What does that oil and that peat moss and those rags become when they're on the floor? You clean them up. It was all dirty. Now you've got it all cleaned up. What type of hazard is that now?
Waste hazard.
Waste.
It is a waste. It's a type 3 hazard, yeah. A tier 3 hazard. So how is it that you, as a tier 2 employee, are able to clean up oil spills with rags and peat moss and shovel it and put it in one of the 4 55-gallon drums that are located throughout your department? Because if you're cleaning up a hazardous waste, then you need to be a tier 3 employee, right? Because tier 3 employees deal with hazardous waste. But you don't when you're working with oil. Does anybody know why? No? We recycle all of that oil and all of those oil solids. And because we recycle them, the government says since you're recycling them, we will not treat them as a hazardous waste. Doesn't make them any less hazardous, still flammable, but they're saying if you're going to recycle it, see, they want to encourage us to recycle. And the way they're going to encourage us to recycle is by saying, we want you to recycle this, and if you do, we'll reward you by letting you treat this as a non-hazardous waste. Regulated, but non-hazardous. So that is why you are all able to work with what seems to be a hazardous waste in the way of oil spills and peat moss and rags and oil saturated cardboard, all of that because of the fact that it is not treated as a hazardous waste because we recycle it. Okay? If that was not the case, then every time oil spills needed to be cleaned up and picked up, we'd have to have some of you trained as tier 3 employees to be able to handle that. Okay, so I just want to go back to that. I left that off earlier. So that is why you are still a tier 2 employee, but you're able to clean up oil spills, oil solids, peat moss saturated, cardboard saturated, oily materials. All right. So, like I said, from time to time, spills are going to occur. What do we do when a spill occurs? Again, Blanca and others have been through this class a lot of times. Y'all should know this stuff like the back of your hand. You know, people say that. I know it like the back of my hand. I know nothing about the back of my hand, frankly. I don't, but anyway. So, there are 5 steps to spill response. Now these 5 steps, some of them have subparts, okay? So there's 5 big steps and then there's some little stuff in between. The first step, anybody know what the first thing you need to do when you have a spill of hazardous waste? Not put a sign. That is part of the first thing you do. Part of the first thing you do is one of the subpoints.
Call somebody.
Call somebody. You're gonna call you're gonna call two coworkers who are also tier 3 and tier 2 employees, because one person can't address it. Now, I'm not talking about, oops, I dropped a spray bottle and it got a little crack and I'm talking about, oh crap, somebody ran the forklift into the side of the 55-gallon drum. Okay, I'm talking about that kind of spill. So when that kind of spill occurs, the first thing you've got to do is get two coworkers that are tier 2 that have been through this training to help you address the problem. So get two coworkers, and then also as a part of the first step. Now there's 3 of you. The 3 of you have some things you need to do. One of you needs to contact your supervisor, your manager, or myself. Okay? Contact supervisor, or manager, or myself. The second one of you needs to go to the spill kit. You all seen these spill kits before. We've got 3 of these. Very soon we're going to have 7 more supplemental kits. They won't be as big as those. They're going to be about the size of this right here throughout the facility. So they'll be more accessible, like to your department in particular. There's 2 of these that are probably about 150 to 200 feet away. And that's a little bit too far. So we're going to have some smaller supplemental kits that'll be well marked, that'll be in your departments. But so after the first person has contacted supervisor, manager, or me, the second person is going to go to the spill kit and get the necessary stuff. Get the PPE and the cleanup materials that you need for the spill. Now, if you're not sure what PPE that you need based on the chemical, where can you look to get that information?
MSDS.
Who said that? MSDS, correct. Look on your SDS sheets. Now, we call them SDS. I said sheet. That's redundant. Look on the SDS, safety data sheets. Do y'all know where your nearest SDS is at?
By the office.
There should be one in Kenny's office. Okay? I am going to, with the inclusion of this new supplemental kit in your area, I'm also going to mount an SDS book. So they'll be side by side. Okay? But you go to the SDS book, you look up the chemical, you go to section, it's either section 4 or 5, and it's going to say personal protective equipment. And under that it's going to say, in the event of an accidental release of this chemical, use, and it's going to list off goggles, respirator, neoprene gloves, whatever is needed to protect yourself from that chemical. Okay, so person number 2 is going to the spill kit to get what's needed to protect you and to begin to clean up. And person number 3 is going to cordon off the area. Make sure folks aren't coming and gawking and staring. That's probably not going to be a problem. That's if necessary. Maybe put some caution tape around the area, just kind of to mark off the area so forklifts don't drive into it until it's addressed. Okay, so that's all step 1. Step 1, get 2 people to help you and do those 3 things. Okay, notify, get to the spill kit, and cordon off the area. All right, the next step. Anybody got any idea what step number 2 is? You've done all that. You've cordoned off the area. You've got all the stuff from the spill kit handy. Supervisor, Gary's been notified, knows what's going on. Now what are we going to do?
Just peep them off.
Almost. Almost, not quite.
Clean it up.
Almost, not quite. We want to do some, before we start cleaning it up, there's something we want to do. We want to,
Secure the area.
nope, we've already secured the area. Nope, containment is right after this. Right before we contain it, we want to stop it. Okay, we want to stop it. Wherever it's coming from, we want to stop it. Because it's hard to contain a moving object. Okay, so what's spilled out is going to keep getting bigger and bigger if we don't stop the source. So the second thing you want to do after you've done all those number 1 steps is stop the spill. Okay, now, let's talk about ways we can stop it. One way we can stop it is inside the spill kit. We'll talk about that in a minute. Other other just easy, logical ways to stop a spill. Let's say this fork has gone in and punctured a 55-gallon drum of vanishing oil, and it's glub, glub, glub outside where it's been punctured by a fork. That fork's stuck up in there. What's something we want to do to try to stop it?
Put some rags around it.
Put some rags around it. Very good. Use those rags like a dike. Stuff those things in there and try to get. Yep. Now, if the fork is in there, what do you want to do with the forklift?
Take it out.
No, you don't want to take it out. Maybe push it in a little bit further.
Maybe push it in a little further, but you want to leave it in there. Because as soon as right now, all it's leaking is the area around the fork. You pull that fork out, the whole thing's going to start leaking.
Right.
So if the fork is still in there, leave it in there. Okay, stuff some rags around it. If the fork has come out of it, then you may want to stuff some rags. What else might you do if the fork is out of it? You've got a hole in the side. Turn it up. Who said that? Turn it up. You want to turn it up. If you get it, you've got the hole in the side and you've got stuff pouring out of it, you lay that thing on the side. It's going to take a couple of you. That's why we want to get some co-workers. Lay it down on its side. Now the hole's facing up. It's going to leak out of a hole facing up. Okay? Now, and lastly, we have a drum patch, a barrel patch that we'll look at in a minute that you can wrap around it and come along it in place and it'll tighten up and seal it. Okay, but we want to stop the source. That is the first thing you want to do. Then, once you stop the source, then we want to contain. Contain the spill. Okay, now containment involves doing some things and it involves accomplishing some stuff. There's three aspects or three areas that we want to accomplish to ensure containment. Now, above every spill kit in the plant, there's a sign that says emergency spill response equipment, and there's going to be these three documents. Okay, this tells you what's in the kit, this tells you what containment is, and then this tells you who the emergency coordinators are, and it has at least 2 phone numbers for all 4 of us. Okay, I'm the primary. Becky Smallwood, who's our plant manager, is the secondary, and then O.C. Martinez and Javier Macias are our backups. All our phone numbers are on there. Our street addresses are marked out. The government or the police might need to know where we're at and come find us if we don't answer our phone. Knock on the door and tell us the building's on fire. But we don't want our addresses up there in case some upset employee, I don't want you to know where I live. So, and then there's some other phone numbers on there that we might have to contact regarding the spill. So, this is real important. How do we achieve containment? Other than physically containing the spill, which we'll talk about some more in just a minute, other than physically doing it, there is some aspects that mean if we do this and we do this and we do this, then we've contained it. Containment is good. So you may know why containment is good.
So it won't be no further.
Well, so it doesn't get any further. If we can keep it contained and keep it from getting where it affects some things we want to talk about a minute ago, if we can contain it, then I don't have to call Fulton County and tell them I got a bunch of oil in your sewer. Or call the state of Georgia and tell them I spilled a bunch of oil in the ground. Or call my neighbor and say I got a bunch of oil on your property. Or worse, acids, other things we deal with here at Spectra. So the first key to containment is keeping the spill on our property. We want to keep it on Spectra property. Now this is good to write down because you can use your notes on the evaluation. Hint, hint. Keep the spill on our property. Keep it on our property, then it's nobody else's business. But we also need to keep it from coming into contact with
Other people,
well,
vehicles,
soil. We want to keep it out of the dirt. Okay, we want to keep it on asphalt or concrete. Okay, when it gets to where it can get in the earth, then it becomes somebody else's business. Okay, so we want to keep it off of the soil and the dirt. And lastly, we want to keep it out of Storm drains, water sources, exactly. We want to keep it out of where the rainwater goes down in there. We want to keep it out of that. We want to keep it out of our septic sewers. We have plugged virtually all of the septic lines in our floor that go to the septic sewers. So to get something in our septic sewer, you've either got to put it in a sink or flush it down the toilet. But there are places where you worked there before. You go into some restrooms, and there's a place there where if you wash the restroom down, all the water goes in to the septic sewer. So we have to keep it out of the septic sewers, and we've got to keep it out of the storm sewers. If we do that, we keep it on our property. If we keep it out of the earth, and we keep it out of the sewers, then I don't have to tell anybody about it. It's not Fulton County's business. It's not the city of Atlanta's business. It's not the state of Georgia's business. It remains our business, and that's the way we want it. Okay? So that's really important, because once it becomes their business, they're in the business of making money. And so they want to get money from us because of what we did, and make us pay money is punishment, so we'll never do it again. So containment is very important like that. All right, so we've got some people to help us, and we've done some stuff. We've stopped the spill source. We've contained the spill. And now we've started putting down the peat moss. We've started cleaning it up and everything else. And we're now that all of that is becoming a regulated non-hazardous waste, because it is oil that we're going to recycle. So but we're going to still put it all in a hazardous waste bag. But I know that what's going in there is oil, so it's okay. So we're going to do it now. What all goes in that bag? What all are we going to put in there? Rags.
Anything you use to clean up the area.
Anything that we use to clean up the area, absolutely. Because anything that we used became contaminated. And because it was contaminated, this is still step 4, yes sir. We're disposing, the term is really disposing of it. Disposing of it properly is number 4. So anything that came into contact with the hazardous material has to be disposed of properly, because it has become contaminated. Okay, and then lastly, step 5 is to properly document it and report it. Now, by properly documenting and reporting, I'm talking about reporting it to me. I probably already know. Sometimes spills happen and I don't get told, because they're moderate spills. They're not real serious, like call Gary right away, but they're more than a bottle dropping on the ground and cracking. And so I don't find out till the next morning when somebody brings me a document or report and says, hey, we had a little incident yesterday with some oil out in the yard. We got it all cleaned up. Here's some documentation as to what happened. I'm reporting it. Now, for something to be proper documentation, there's 3 things that it needs to be. We talked about this from other classes. You don't need to make a note of this unless you just want to. I want you to remember this from last year. For something to be properly documented, what does that document need to be and have? Needs to be legible, right? I gotta be able to read it. If it's hand scratch, if your handwriting's not good, that's okay. I understand that. Type it on your computer, print it out. Okay, so it needs to be legible. And very importantly, it needs to be what? Signed and dated. Signed and dated. If it is not signed and dated, it's not proper documentation, and it's no good to anybody. So legible, signed, and dated. And that concludes the 5 steps of spill response. Now, we don't have to talk about Tier 2 LQ, so I'm going to take a minute and we're going to do something we haven't done before, which is break down the contents of the spill kit. Okay, so if you've seen one of these floating around out there, they're really dusty. We're going to get them cleaned up here soon and get them all spiffy again, get new signs on them and everything else. But in them, there's several things, hopefully everything you need to clean up a spill. One of the first things you'll find in there are some of these jokers. You know what these are called? Socks. These are socks, okay? So if we got a big spill here, we're gonna put these around the perimeter of the spill, okay? This is kind of a small spill here. We're gonna just kind of get them around the perimeter to try to keep it from leaking out. And these will start to absorb it and create, again, a perimeter or a dam around the outside of the spill. Okay, so inside that now there's all kinds of stuff there. We might use some peat moss in there to absorb it. We might use these absorbent mats. Again, the spill kit is full of these absorbent mats, so we can throw them down in there and they'll start soaking up all of that stuff that's spilled in there. Now, again, when this soaks up a bunch of oil, what does this become? Hazardous waste. Okay, we know because it's oil, it's regulated non-haz, but my point is, once this comes into contact, it's contaminated and it's waste. Okay, so got that going on. Now we got a handy dandy shovel in there. I like this shovel. It comes apart so it fits down in the container real good. But this is the shovel that's in all the spill kits. Now what do you notice about this shovel as opposed to a lot of shovels you've seen? It's plastic. Why is it plastic? A lot of the chemicals that we're shoveling, that you're going to be cleaning up are what? They're flammable. So we don't want to use something that might create sparks. So we use a plastic shovel so it is non-sparking. Okay, so that's going to help us clean up our mess on the floor and shovel it into our bag. Our bag is in these little containers here that are inside the spill kits. This is no small bag. You fellas, ladies, gentlemen, you can put a body in this bag, okay? Don't do it. But if we get a body that's all contaminated, no, just kidding. So this is our hazardous waste. You can delete that from the recording. This is our hazardous waste bag. This is where all of the waste that we shovel up is going to go. Everything that's contaminated, we're going to put in this bag. Now we've also got, I mentioned to you, the barrel patch. You see here, like I said, it's got a little come-along device on the back of it. This wraps around the barrel, and it has a really, I don't even know what kind of material this is, but it's pretty pliable. It's solid, but it's also pliable. So you put that over where the fork may have damaged it. You pull it good and tight, and it will completely seal up where the leak is at. Okay, so we've got one of these in each spill kit. You may find that you need a respirator. And you say, well, gosh, we work with these chemicals all the time and we don't need a respirator. That's true. We check all our chemicals, and every chemical out there that you work with, you are not exposed to hazardous levels of any of those chemicals. But if you have a big spill, all of a sudden you got 20 or 30 gallons of it, the fumes could be a lot stronger than just, the occasional spray. Moreover, what happens if we have a container of MEK get speared with a fork in the back of a trailer? No airflow. It's hot in there. Those fumes are strong. That's where you're going to need to put a half-face respirator on, put these cartridges on it, and wear that to protect yourself while you're up in there cleaning. Now the reality is, in that situation, there's probably none of you in here that would get sent into the back of that trailer to clean it up. Okay, we would take some of our most experienced first responders for environmental spills to handle that. But I want you to be aware that's why there's a respirator in the spill kits with cartridges that are sealed and dated. And we check these monthly to make sure that they're still in good condition and date. There'll be some goggles in there to protect your eyes. Mentioned cordoning off the area if necessary, so we've got some do not enter tape that's going to be in there for person number 3 who might be cordoning off the area. A pair of gloves in here. There actually should be 2 pairs of gloves. There should be some like this, and there should be some neoprene gloves in there that are resistant more so than these are to oils and to chemicals. And then lastly in here, something y'all wouldn't really have to deal with, which is part of the reason that some of the smaller kits won't have everything in it. Here we've got some base absorbent and some acid absorbent. Okay, if we have an acid spill, chromic acid spill over in the other building, well, we may well enough contain it with this, but what's contained in there is enough to, burn your finger off. we need to take some of this acid absorbent and we'll begin to sprinkle on it, because this will neutralize that acid, bring the pH up to around 6.5 or 7.5, so that it won't be harmful to you. And the base does just the opposite. If we have some of our Parco 1205 that we use to clean the metal, that is a very concentrated potassium hydroxide, which is a fancy chemical name for soap. It's what makes soap. And if you know, any of you who maybe ever dealt with lye soap or something, know that in its concentrated form, that stuff will burn the slop out of you. You know, just take a bath and don't rinse off and see how bad you're hurting. So this base absorbent would be put down on something like that to bring the pH down to a safe level. Okay, so these things are provided here in the spill kit as well, so that you have everything that you need to clean up. The only thing that's not in there, there's two things that aren't in there that you should have plenty of in your department: rags and peat moss. Okay, we don't take up space in these for rags and peat moss, but plenty of those should be available. Okay.